Hey friends, this week's Patreon exclusive bonus audio is a questionnaire with today's guest, Vikram Murthi. We talk about his favorite film and his most unwatchable one. Of course, we get his take on Southland Tales as well. Be sure to join us at patreon.com/unwatchables for as little as $1 a month. We've got reviews, bonus audio, exclusive episodes, and of course, our undying gratitude. That's patreon.com/unwatchables. Hello and welcome to Unwatchables. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we welcome film critic Vikram Murthi to talk about two very different films inspired by the 1966 University of Texas tower shooting. First up is 1968's Targets, the Boris Karloff-starring directorial debut of Peter Bogdanovich that features a lightly fictionalized version of the shooter. And finally, 2016's Tower, an unconventional hybrid animation documentary told entirely from the ground view of the victims and those who acted to save them.
It's Bogdanovich.
Is it really?
No, I don't know. I think so, maybe.
Bogdanovich? Is that what I should be saying?
Yeah, but I think it's probably fine, but it is Bogdanovich.
Well, it's
we
very
know him
important
personally.
we
You
get these
don't,
things right.
Mark. So
I know. We just did an episode of Czech filmmakers, and I labored to try and get their names right. I might as well get Peter Bogdanovich's name right. Anyway, our guest today is Vikram Murthi. He is a contributing writer to The Nation and the editor of Downtime magazine. You may have also seen his byline in Filmmaker magazine, Reverse Shot, Vulture, the AV Club, and many more publications. We are very thrilled to have Vikram on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
to the firing line or something. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Half of the I don't know. One of the movies gets me into the spirit of dark humor, and the other one really makes me feel bad about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's
kind of why they're a good pairing. These two.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, this could be a very somber episode, but that's we've had it easy the last couple episodes, I think, with the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Doing
It's
stuff
time,
like the
time to
Cable
get
Guy.
Not so fun. Yeah, no more Jim
And
Carrey.
No more Jim
No
Carrey.
more Czech Beauty and the Beast.
yeah. Let's ease into mass shootings.
Sure. So, Victor, I know that you did, have a couple different ideas that you were, down to do when you were kind of looking through our list. But was there something in particular just that made these ones stick out? Which actually, we had both of these on the list, but they weren't paired together, and it makes such perfect sense. I can't believe it didn't occur to me before. So, kudos again for that too, because the way that these take just such different views of the same event for some reason had gone over my head.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of like these movies individually, but I did sort of see the Whitman parallel, and it just seemed very obvious. I mostly just it's an excuse for me to rewatch these movies. I mean, I had seen Targets, I want to say about 5 or 6 years ago. I could be wrong. And I was kind of struck at by how fully formed Bogdanovich's whole thing was, and also how he kind of took the exploitation style of like the Roger Corman school and kind of took it into the future, because the whole point of that, the whole thing of that movie was that he's like a true movie brat and was trying to take kind of old, classical Hollywood and into new Hollywood and that kind of thing. And it sort of was also a good commentary on the nihilism of violence of the era and all of that. And then also I remember really liking Tower when it came out. I don't think I reviewed it, but I remember really vibing with it. And, I remember also being very affected by it. And I had not seen it, I think, since 2016, since it came out. So it was a good excuse to see both of them, but they kind of made sense in my mind as kind of a way to look at how mass violence trickles down into is as a product of society and trickles down into how society goes forward from there.
And they're very different reactions to the same event. Yeah, this like sort of. I mean, so the Kennedy assassination happens, and then like I think it's 3 years later or something that the Texas mass shooting happens, which is like this. I guess he was a Vietnam veteran, and he like killed his wife, killed his mom, and then got up into the tower at the University of Texas and started just firing down at whoever he could find. And it really does, like in hindsight, like with even watching Targets, it feels like the birth of something. Like even they knew it was like the birth of something, not just like coming from the echo of the Kennedy assassination, but something, again, more homegrown. This lone wolf thing, which is just like it becomes just unfortunately more and more pertinent for us here in 2025, where it happens literally every day.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I think there's a lot of, just by the nature of the act, I think there's a lot of intersecting political problems happening with the Whitman shooting. At the time, what's interesting was that I think a lot of the press surrounding Whitman was that this was a normal American family man. He had a job. And all of this kind of like, they were kind of projecting a sort of white picket fence sense of morality onto him, sort of like all American boy. But of course, there were things in his background. His father was a domestic abuser. He was also a domestic abuser. He had mental issues. I mean, there were a lot of things happening in the background, but superficially, he was this kind of like all-American man that suddenly had a break and started killing people. But I think what's interesting was that, when you look at the shooting and then you look at Targets, if you want to start there, it becomes this nexus point of, gun control, of mental illness, of sort of lax security standards. And it becomes this whole kind of focal point for a lot of intersecting but seemingly disparate problems in society. I think it was, I'm going off of the Wikipedia page, but I remember, I think it was Tarantino who said that Targets was like the great gun control movie, and how it is sort of like you look at just the easy access and the trunk shot of him opening up and just having all of these guns, and the access to that being kind of an entry point into sort of violent attitudes.
Yeah, and
if I'm
even
not
if you didn't
mistaken, it
know
was-
anything
oh, yeah.
about the actual event, I mean, it all seems so familiar. Which, if you just go through the Wikipedia page, for this, it'll it'll tell you it was the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in the country for about 18 years. Then it links to the next shooting that topped it, and then you go to that page and it says, well, this was the deadliest mass shooting until 7 years later. Links to the next page, to the next. Which shows you how relevant this is, but also how this particular event could possibly be lost in the morass of everything that's come since, where it doesn't seem as special now, which is depressing and horrifying. I think both these movies do a good job, though, of taking you back to something that was very specific while still resonating forward. Like Seth said, that happened in 1966. It was like 96 minutes long of this guy terrorizing people and killing eventually 15 people, including an unborn child, injuring 31. And that's, again, not counting his mother and wife who he killed. And obviously, there's been tons of documentaries and books in the years since. I guess there was a TV movie I haven't seen starring Kurt Russell as the shooter called The Deadly Tower. And that was in 1975, which Targets came out in 68, which is barely 2 years after the actual thing happened. And
I read that it was actually, it was caught in release hell or something like that. Like, I think they shot it like almost a year after.
Right.
And it took it like 2 years to actually be released. which is insane. Which in that time already there had been like, I think the Martin Luther King was assassinated and all these other things had happened.
The other Kennedy.
Like, yes, and we're revving up for like 69 and the dissolution of everything, and it's just like, oh my god.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that well, first of all, when it came out, I know that they added like because of the unfortunate cultural resonance at the time, they added like a weird prologue to it that was against Bogdanovich's wishes, that were sort of talking about guns and violence, and it was kind of like the studios got in front of any kind of discomfort that might fall from the audience based on the film versus how things have played out in current events. That has since been like, whenever anyone watches Targets now, it's not, no one sees that prologue. So I have not seen it either. But I do think it's interesting because because I think Targets, and I'm almost positive about this, Targets was kind of, even as Bogdanovich's, even as things become revitalized over time, or as early Bogdanovich movies get shown more often in like rep cinema or whatever, Targets was like largely sidelined and sort of like treated as like, oh, this was his like first foray. And for a while, Last Picture Show was kind of the de facto feature debut for Bogdanovich's like whole career. And I think it was, unfortunately, because of the preponderance of mass violence happening in America, Targets kind of came back into the forefront within the last 15 years as like, oh, this is actually, a movie worth looking at. And I think it's a very good film. I was sort of stunned at how, because I remember it, I remember it pretty well, but I forgot how it both plays as like a great sort of like an audition for the majors for Bogdanovich, while also being incredibly patient. Like when you watch that movie, it's like insert shot, you got tracking shots, you got all of this stuff that like Bogdanovich just wants to like show that he can like be a real director and like can kind of like take on the job. But also as just a film itself, it feels very chilling and kind of merges its industry satire with a kind of chilling horror like look at a man's mental break.
Yeah, like I see what you're saying there, like it being an audition, and I feel like it's been referred to as that. Like I do think it's like one of the great debuts ever for a director. But yeah, you can tell he's like showing you what he can do, but it does not feel like oh, I'm just getting my foot in the door with this, because it never, as much as he's displaying his talents, it never loses sight of this unique approach that it has to everything, which is very concrete and like always seeking realism. There's no form. You can see he's like allergic to manipulation, or like manipulating the audience. So there's no like soundtrack. There's only what you hear on TV, and you get a lot of it, because in American life, you would, on paper, you might think that's like, oh, it's like an art movie or something, but you realize that, like, yeah, in American life, everywhere you go, there's a TV blaring something, there's a radio going and stuff like that, and it all works really well because even in the most horrifying sequence, there's no cue as far as film convention is concerned, telling you like, all right, now you need to feel bad about this, and like, all right, this is the good guy who's going to stop the bad guy, which is like exactly what needed to be done with this sort of story, and was definitely not being done with these sort of things back then at all, and still like just gets butchered these days, I think.
Yeah, it's really assured for a debut, and Bogdanovich has such an interesting career because his first 4 movies, I'm not sure I can think of another filmmaker whose first 4 or more like consecutive movies are so completely different. He followed this up with The Last Picture Show, which is this stark coming of age drama that is brilliant. And then What's Up, Doc, which is this just delightful screwball throwback with one of Barbra Streisand's best film roles, in my opinion, and Ryan O'Neal. And then right off the heels of that is Paper Moon, which is this period kind of, I don't know, father-daughter crime drama comedy. I'm not sure I would, if you just showed me those movies in a vacuum, I would have any idea the same guy made them. And just the level of quality there, it's really amazing. I'm not quite sure what happened to him after that. I haven't seen a lot of his films after that initial run.
Yeah,
I haven't heard great things. He did Mask, the Eric Stoltz Cher movie.
right.
I think I saw the Cat's Meow
years
ago. Yeah, and so I don't know. He was kind of one of those guys who came out really hot at the beginning, and of course that's all saying after Targets, which itself is this brutal, merciless thriller that also does just not fit in with anything that I'm aware of that he's done since. And you have this feeling that there is something scrappy about it. This was something that he was able to make because Boris Karloff owed, I believe, Roger Corman a favor. So he was able to have him for a few days of shooting. So especially with how quickly this came after the University of Texas shooting, there's a sense that he's kind of flying by the seat of his pants and diving right into the zeitgeist with something and pulling it all together.
Yeah, I mean, just let me go through this in my head. Couple things. One, Bogdanovich's later movies are generally underrated. I would highly recommend Saint Jack. And his last film, She's Funny That Way, was recut recently by a guy. I forget his name, but a guy kind of took it upon himself with Bogdanovich's approval as he was, I think, on his way out to kind of recut the movie. And it's called Squirrels to the Nuts. I want to say it's screened at MoMA, and it's also fantastic. I think a lot of those movies are, I mean, they're creakier than the first four, some of them, but they're generally underrated. And
this is the tea I need.
Yeah. I would absolutely, at the very least, check out Saint Jack. That's a crazy movie. But I think it's interesting. Bogdanovich is like a true movie brat, and in a way that we kind of take for granted now. He was a programmer at MoMA in his early 20s. He kept a log of every movie he saw from like when he was like a kid till 1970. He was seeing like 400 movies a year. I mean, this guy was like a real child. Like, we kind of take directors who are kind of cinephiles for granted now, but he was kind of one of the first to actually like break into American cinema. They had that tradition in France, but he was kind of taking his cues from Cahiers and was like, he was a critic first, and then he became a director, and he got into the Roger Corman School. And, the Roger Corman School at the time was very fast. I mean, he was like an assistant, then became a director in like 3 weeks. And he was, his first 4 movies are self-conscious throwbacks. I mean, he was absolutely like one of those guys who believed that, Hawks and Ford were kind of the end all be all, and he was coming in at the end. I mean, there's that line in the movie where he's like, all the good movies have already been made. And that is very much how he perceived his position in kind of the film ecosphere at the time. And sort of like he was operating under like the fact that like everything's on the downswing, and it was already over. We had already passed the peak and all of that. And I do think that a lot of the industry stuff in Targets is very much a kind of very cute sort of look at how he saw Hollywood moving into the new age, because it was a few years before, it was a year before Easy Rider. It was, a few years before the studios caught up to kind of a lot of the movie brats of his generation that were, starting to get an entry point into the industry. But Bogdanovich was an early guy who was sort of like, I'm going to make throwbacks to 30s and 40s cinema in the late 60s and 70s. And I think it's interesting that, he has the Hawks movie in there, The Criminal Code, and it's all very kind of a self-conscious homage to a time that he got to witness from afar but didn't get to live in, which was always Bogdanovich's entire modus operandi. I do think it's pretty funny that, as much as he, laments this kind of bygone era, he also inserts himself in the movie as this like swaggeringly cool director. He's definitely an arrogant kind of guy where he's like, he's sleeping with the hot assistant. He's got the cool, outfits. He's definitely like a young guard who loves the old masters, but is definitely thinks very highly of himself, which I did clock this time. I had forgotten how much he like opens with him being like, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night because of you. And I'm just like, oh wow, you really think you're hot shit, buddy.
Yeah, we should definitely mention that he has a not insignificant role in the cast of this movie too.
Trying to convince Boris Karloff's character to be in his movie, like be in his.
I do think at the end of the film, not to skip ahead, but there is the kind of implication that Boris Karloff might be convinced to do his script because he's like, is this what I was afraid of, these young people? And it's like, it's not confirmed, but I do think that the idea is that Boris Karloff's character, kind of reconsiders retirement, because he wants to be in the graces of Peter Bogdanovich.
Right. Is this what The Terror was all about?
Yeah.
And famously, the movie does start with The Terror, which is another.
There you go.
Yeah, if anyone who's listening to this hasn't seen Targets, they might wonder, well, hang on, is this a movie about Charles Whitman or about is this a self-reflexive, like Hollywood inside movie making story? And it's both. And they are kept separate for most of the movie. And that's what's really interesting here is that we have Boris Karloff playing basically a fictionalized version of himself, retiring from the business. And we see clips from his actual movie, The Terror, throughout, which is supposed to be like his newest film.
Which is a Roger Corman movie, that they had access to.
And
featuring Jack Nicholson.
Young Jack Nicholson. And if someone
again about to blow up the Howard Hawks thing,
or recognize Jack Nicholson, you might be faked out by the opening because the movie just kind of starts with, clips from The Terror. And, that's all very clever. And now, meanwhile, we keep alternating back with this other story, which is, I think they really do feel discreet to me for most of the movie. The tones are very, very different. And, on that one other end, we have this guy who is kind of almost a lookalike of the real Charles Whitman. They have a very close physical resemblance, and everything that we've been talking about, as far as the real guy, is really reflected in this guy's performance and how he's presented, that he has this kind of bland all-American charm. He knows how to turn on, and then just when other people aren't around, you can just see the light kind of go out of his eyes. And we're never given real access to what he's experiencing. Like he's placed under this petri dish there where you spend all this time with him in his shoes, really. Yet there's no explanation or motive that can be made sense of. And I think that's kind of the point. That's what he's saying about this new breed of mass murderer who seems normal on the outside. And there really isn't a great explanation for what these funny ideas that he keeps getting, as he puts it, when he's trying to explain this to his wife.
Right. Which he just kind of, and even when the big moment does happen, where he goes off, it doesn't feel like he's going off. We're surprised that it happens, because again, Bogdanovich isn't really leading us by the hand into knowing when he's going to take off. It definitely, like, amazing acting that we can tell just from the little lines, subtle things that we're headed this way. But yeah, and then when he goes, it's just like, no, now we have no access. He's shot the only person he would ever talk to, his wife, is what it goes off. Which I did kind of think about the poster. There's like the main poster of it, like, tells you exactly what the movie is. Which like is a quote, like, from his letter that he types the night before. I think he's like types it right before he goes on his rampage, and it's just like, I just killed my wife, I just killed my mother, and more will die, or whatever like that, which is scrawled across the poster. So exactly, because I mean, it's still Roger Corman world that Bogdanovich is working in. So he playing in that way, he is like probably not in control of that, but he's playing in the world of like exploitation films. He's doing anything but he's still playing, like, acting like he's playing the game, just to kind of pull the wool over your eyes a little bit. I kind of wondered about it, if like you really didn't see the poster, you really didn't know what you were getting in for to see this movie. It would be, I wonder if you might not even catch like where we're headed. It would be a real shock.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you brought that up because I think if you weren't primed for what was going to happen, I think it would play even better because
Especially in
it.
'66. Oh my god!
Yeah, I
Like
mean, I think it's a fairly
yeah,
restrained movie until until the violence happens,
Mm.
and I do think there's a lot of like self. You mentioned self reflexivity. I mean, the movie has a very light meta kind of reflexive touch even in those sequences as well because you have you for when you go to the when you see his home for the first time with the parents and everything, it feels very fairy tale like. It feels very kind of creepily wholesome.
yeah.
There's
Leave
like
it to Beaver.
yeah, exactly. There is a kind of 50s genial attitude coursing through the film, and you have hints that things are not as they seem. Things might be going awry in his mind, and it's not that he doesn't indicate where the story is going, but when the violence happens, it feels very stark and messy and abrupt. Like the violence isn't camp, and it might be the film might fit within an exploitation genre in the broad sense, but in the text, the violence never feels over the top. It feels like upsettingly intimate in a way. And I find it fascinating because especially when we get to the freeway and when we get to the drive-in, it's not he doesn't go over the top with there's no distancing that comes from a lot of exploitation movies where the violence is so kind of campy in a way where you can kind of have a sort of uh, distance between the actual effects of the violence. Bogdanovich wants you to feel every gunshot and wants you to feel kind of every murder as
And how
a
sad
real
and
tragedy. Yeah, it's
sad
really
they are.
and also just like the kind of the gap. I mean, I do think he leans on this a little too much sometimes, but I did think about when he's on, I guess it's a water tower over the freeway. He's drinking like a Coca-Cola. He's having like his like wrapped sandwich. It's a very kind of like schoolboy sort of lunch that he's having while he's carrying these like rifles and he's like murdering these people. He does kind of hit that note heavily, but that is sort of what he's going for. It's not a subtle movie, but I do
Sure.
think it's very effective.
Yeah, it's very matter of fact. And it really doesn't give you any room to get like any kind of thrill out of it. That scene, where he's shooting in the freeway at random people, which only today we would see and think of as like a first person shooter of a video, or a video game.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no
It's
wild
so
cutting going
impersonal.
on.
And all these victims are just completely random. It's not like, in a slasher film where you get to know who the people are who are getting killed. You really get the anonymity and the randomness out of it, which is horrifying. I mean, that freeway scene is just so disturbing and chilling. And I mean, it only gets worse from there, I guess. This is a movie I saw for the first time years ago, and I actually didn't know what it was about, except I knew that there was something involving a sniper. So I really did get the jolt of like, oh my god,
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially the way that other side of the movie just doesn't prepare you for that at all. Which I guess we should explain, like what it's trying to do. Why is it juxtaposing these two things? And I don't think that's really any mystery either, because like you said, Vikram, it's not. This is not a subtle movie. And he is attempting something pretty ambitious here about likening movie villains or an older version of movie villains to this new kind of real life villain, which I don't know. That's a lot to talk about there. And I'm not sure that I think it's totally successful. It's definitely ambitious. I mean, what do you guys think about how those two parts relate to each other? Because I felt like I never got a great sense of who the Karloff character really was, besides the baggage that, the actor was bringing to it. That is, he clearly wants to get out of these movies, but you don't really get an idea of his specific situation or his conflict. He does come out and say a lot like, I'm an anachronism, I'm a dinosaur, I'm a museum piece. But I kind of feel like those lines are doing a lot of the heavy lifting as far as really getting a sense of who he is.
100%. I mean, that's I think you're reacting appropriately. I mean, like Karloff's character, as much as I like Karloff's performance in this movie a lot, I think he actually does a really good job. The character itself is, entirely loaded down with the weight of people, like the audience's awareness of like the real life Boris Karloff and his career, and the whole thematic thrust of the movie is that, before the 60s, violence had motive, violence had purpose. When it happened, it was coming from some sort of human understanding, whereas the Charles Whitwins of the world and the assassinations of the 60s, they're coming from a place of nihilism and coming from a place of destruction. And so it's this idea of like confronting the nihilism and sort of trying to not being able to understand it, but also trying to kind of meet it where it's at. And this kind of culminates in the ending, which is very much, not to spoil anything, but he Boris Karloff's character confronts I forget his name, the Charles Whitman character. And
Bobby, I think.
Bobby, yeah. I think he just, he slaps him around and he becomes a little boy. And the whole thing is, you have people who have access to weapons that can make themselves, and access to sort of a kind of distant, omniscient sort of perspective in order to instill this violence and sort of in order to kind of enact it. And when you get up close and you look them in the eye, they're nothing more than a man, right? That's the whole like pat thematic idea of the movie. I think it actually works pretty well in the moment, but it's not these aren't sophisticated treatises happening, but I do think it is pretty funny that you have the old guard looking at the violent youth and coming to this conclusion that, well, they're still kids, as much as they might kill us all, they're still children.
It's true. Yeah, and he says, like, oh, that's what I was afraid of. Yeah, that's the line that he gives. Yeah, I mean, I could agree that it's maybe an unsophisticated and unsubtle like morality thing or metaphor that's going on there with like what links the two threads, right? But for me, I just go back to like what he's doing even with music in the movie, that it's not like coming at me as a soundtrack to a movie, it's coming out of a car as it goes by. And that's really how I wind up, even if it wasn't intentional, even if Peter was really laboring over this like masterful like metaphor that he was going with this whole monsters and men thing. For me, the Boris Karloff character does still, and it's miraculous, like because of the atmosphere and the style, that I don't even know how much you could plan it to work the way it does. It winds up to me feeling like, yeah, that's there. But it feels so much more like reality than a like pieced together story. And it feels so much more like we just happened to zero in over here on Boris in a way. And of course, if we zeroed into another character, we could Magnolia this all day and find ways of like threading it to like, oh, this girl's life and what it has to do with this and the killer and the way shooters become who they are and everything like that. Or
I mean, I think it's absolutely. I think you're right. I also think Bogdanovich's direction is kind of astounding, and in certain places, I think the whole scene in the house where he, like the long sequence where he kind of cleans up the violence in the home, I think is exceptionally well done.
And it never like falls all the way into camp or like, haha, he's cleaning up blood. Like, oh, but and
No,
and
it's
that's
really
being
upsetting.
intercut with like a silly. I don't know how like you could really pull it off the way he does, and I could understand that it doesn't work for some people, but the whole like Boris Karloff getting drunk with Peter Bogdanovich's character, and they just like have a hijinks basically, and they fall asleep in the same bed, and they're like, "Whoa, I don't remember you," but this is all happening while the birth of a murderer, like a mass shooter, is happening. Like we're cutting between these two things, and somehow I don't. I don't personally get whiplash. I like actually find those scenes funny, and then immediately am blown back into like the ghostly feeling, right?
Well, it helps that they stand on their own very well. I mean, like that stuff is really well done, and that stuff is really funny, and the other stuff is chilling and is kind of like eerie.
It's all there.
It's like
yeah.
I think when you try to make these two kind of disparate threads, it helps that they both stand on their own sake. They're not like they don't depend on one another. And I think it's I mean, like again, like I get a thrill, I get a kick out of the industry stuff. I think it's funny. I think it's cute. I think it's silly, and I also get a kick out of the stuff that's like really upsetting. And when they converge, I mean, I think there is an argument made that when it converges, it's a little clumsy. It's not 100% as seamless as Bogdanovich wants, but he was like 27. We can forgive
Right.
certain
Yeah, I know.
certain rough edges. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I guess that's the last thing I would say about the convergence, though, is that yeah, it's like I think if he did too much of a good job of tying it up, right, like it would feel even more like because I never really feel like I know what he's doing here. He's like these two are rushing towards each other because I've seen that in movies, right?
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily feel that way to me, and it doesn't feel that way in the end. It does feel like they bumped into each other, you know.
I did forget.
To me.
No, I did forget that the drive-in. I thought the drive-in stuff started earlier, and it really is like only the last 15 to 20 minutes, because he only really tips his hand to where it's going is when Bobby like drives into the drive-in early, and you're like, oh, okay, he's gonna make the appearance, so you kind of know where it's going. But that happens way later than I remembered. I sort of remembered it being he was indicating a lot sooner than I thought, which is impressive. It's like it's really like if you have to put yourself in the mind of someone who is watching this for the first time without any knowledge. Like if you were going into this cold, it comes pretty late when you're like, oh, this is where the two threads are going to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's funny because I thought that maybe going into it this time and knowing from the jump what he was up to might make it go down smoother as opposed to the first time that I watched it. And for a while it kind of did. I think that, like you said, I do think the two parts, like on totally individually, one is pretty delightful and the other one is totally chilling, but like they work great on their own. And it's the juxtaposition, I think, as it goes on further and the story gets more and more horrifying on Bobby's side, that I was demanding a little bit more of there to be a cohesion there. Or, I almost wondered if Karloff's character, instead of him being this guy who just wants out of the business, was maybe this would have more impact if he was clinging on to it more, or he was going to that that premiere as a more of a true believer, as opposed to pretty early on, he does kind of bluntly state the thesis where he pulls up a newspaper that says youth kills 6 in supermarket. And he's see, this is no one's afraid of painted faces anymore. And that kind of just leaves the rest of the film to just kind of play out like exactly what was outlined at that point. And I don't know, I think by the time they get there, that part of the story has been too thinly sketched to carry this enormous weight that it's asked to in the end, not just as their final, statement of the film, but kind of even to justify the horror of what we're seeing going on the other side of the story. Which is kind of another topic I want to get into, but maybe I don't want to get too far ahead of us.
No. I actually completely understand where you're coming from. I do think that a lot of this is just by design. Bogdanovich is coasting on a sort of audience nostalgia for Karloff, and it's just sort of like seeing Karloff in a modern context that isn't kind of a horror context.
which does have its own power. That's like, it's legitimate. I felt that
for sure, and it's also part of the text itself, because the whole thing is like, the whole thing is Bogdanovich's character he plays is like, the script I wrote is you playing like a regular person. It's you playing just a regular guy. It's like you who you are, which is, it's cute because that's what he's playing in the movie. But there is sort of like, the screenplay is sort of, jerry-rigged in a way so that he kind of gets his mojo back by confronting the youth, right? So you have him basically world weary for 80 minutes. And that's the whole thing. It's him just being like world weary and, my time is over. And you're right. It is fairly one note, but it's largely because I think Bogdanovich only had Karloff for 2 days and they stretched it into 5, number one. Number two, he only had just purely resources. He only had a certain amount of film stock and he had to get it in under budget and under 80 minutes. And also he's banking on the fact that anyone who's watching this knows who Boris Karloff is, and they're just going to get a kick out of him not being a horror villain, right? Like he's playing against type. And then like a lot of the thematic work of the script is kind of compressed into the last 5 minutes, which is, him sort of confronting the killer, confronting the youth movement, confronting his mortality, all in one fell swoop. But yeah, no, you're not wrong.
I don't know. I think I'm a Target's truther or something.
I like it a lot too, man.
Whatever. Yeah, no. I just mean like whatever it's doing, it just really works on me in the way that I usually don't like this sort of argument of just like, yeah, but like answer, like I feel like I can answer every like quip about it that I could come up with, which is like, well, yeah, just like how life is or something, like how like that, how that feels kind of one note, or that feels kind of like stale, or that's too convenient or something. Which I mean, it's all, again, I said it's like walking this tightrope, like of almost losing its chance to do what it's trying to do, which is display things without manipulation, without trying to Hollywood it, right? By talking about Hollywood, it opens the floodgates of like, well, now we're thinking about things in a narrative sense while trying to create reality with them, and we're tying things together is like a thing that happens in movies. We can't really do that actually in real life. For me, it all still winds up being so minor key, any of these things, that they do just feel like I walked out of my house and I'm just seeing things happen, which I think is what he's trying to do with this movie in such a big way. Like just fly on a wall. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, to your point, I think there's a lot of good restraint that happens. I think psychologically as well. I think it's fairly impressive how he keeps the psychological portrait of the killer to an absolute minimum. You get hints at it. You get a couple big hints, but it's kept to like 1 or 2 moments, and it's not this like, you don't get a whole backstory with him. I also think it's important that it sort of ends where it does. I think that final shot of the parking lot with only his car there is a really good note. I don't think there isn't this protracted epilogue. There's certain things, there's certain moves that the film does that I think are very sophisticated. Even if there are
this is based on true events.
Based on true events. Yeah. And I think like really only, I like how little the killer speaks as soon as the violence happens. He becomes like almost this blank, like automaton in a way. I mean, he talks to the gun vendor to get the bullets, and then after that, it's him to the cops when he's like, "I rarely ever miss," or whatever he says. Like, I do think that stuff is a weaker director would have built out the character more in a way that I think the film would have suffered. Yeah. Like no, for sure. I do think that there's a lot to admire from a directorial standpoint in Targets. And I think that like not even as a first feature, I think just as a movie, it's really, really strong, but especially as a first feature, just thinking, viewing the film from that angle, it is, the moves he makes, even if they are kind of self-consciously like, I'm going to I'm going to do all the things that my favorite directors did in one movie, he still does them really well. I mean,
for sure. And I do think that the way he portrays this character is just, it's very authentic and, very restrained. And that's what's so chilling about it. I don't think though that it is free of this kind of audience manipulation in a way, I guess, because it is so well made and it is very suspenseful. And, I think what I was kind of poking at earlier is that, we have talked about in previous films on this podcast, films that kind of meticulously recreate some kind of a real life tragedy. Like Elephant was a recent one that we talked about. And, there is always a question of what you're doing with that. Because this does, even though clearly this is transposing things into a drive-in. So this is not just dramatizing what happened at the University of Texas, but they did go out of their way to cast a guy who looks a lot like the guy. He does kill his mom and his wife, and little details like putting their bodies in bed and everything. And, it's very much playing on that exact thing. And I do think that he does play it up for suspense. I mean, almost diabolically, like it's downright Hitchcockian, a lot of these camera moves, especially once they get to the drive-in theater. I mean, the way it's calibrated is to absolutely make you squirm. I mean, that's part of what is so strong about the filmmaking. And
I guess I just mean the bad kind of manipulation.
And then he even, right. But then also going, adding in, we got children with their parents who are sobbing as their parents are being gunned down next to them. So, there is something about that makes me a little bit uneasy when it's all in service of this thesis that in that context seems a little naive or simplistic, maybe even reactionary, because I mean, this is kind of, these were the kind of the good old days where the evil on the screen, couldn't hurt you. And now literally there's a gun coming out of the screen and shooting you.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's not like, the dichotomy between movie villains and real life atrocities has always been there. It's not like this was some new thing that now all of a sudden, look how crazy the world has gotten. And before things were so great. And so that stuff did make me a little bit kind of uncomfortable this time. Like, this is really upsetting. I do find a lot of this movie, especially in the last like 20 minutes, to be genuinely like upsetting and tough to watch. And for it to, I'm not sure it quite earns it with where it gets, with it not pulling off, the big gesture that it's going for in the end.
I think it's playing with provocative stuff. I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from, but I also think that in order to make a movie that invokes cinema as explicitly as it does, and to make a movie about violence and sort of like violence inflicted upon society, I think you would be hard pressed to not connect the two in any way, or to even acknowledge sort of the provocation of like violent, cinema creates this kind of violence. And I do think Bogdanovich is having a little fun at the idea.
But you might as well like bring it out. Like, it's the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. And I would be hesitant to say that Bogdanovich is making any sort of like claim about that, and is more kind of interested in just the cute imagery of a gun coming out of the screen, which I mean, I get a kick out of just because it's a neat image, and it is very Hitchcockian. There's a lot of that. He was one of the first people to do a full Hitchcock program retrospective at MoMA back in the day. But I hear where you're coming from. I just think like I definitely am one of these people that chafe against a sort of kind of hit you over the head type of film. And this is not a movie that, keeps its cards close to the vest, but I think it works most of the time. And anytime I got a little tetchy, it didn't really bother me that much, especially just because I think the performances are really strong. I think the direction is really strong, and it does kind of save the film from a kind of from a kind of thudding obviousness, I would say.
Yeah, I guess I don't worry too much
Yeah.
about like there's not I mean, I don't think you're suggesting I think you agree that Mark that it's like not titillating action. It's not like
No.
high octane or gore to get some gore in there.
It doesn't
like
get
that.
off on bloodlust. Like
For me, it like
No.
lingers because it has to. Because if you're going to have this,
But it is
story
trying to
about
have
this
that effect.
shooter-
It is trying to do that to the audience.
sure, yeah, without
It's not having fun, but there's also the flip side of the rubbing your face in the innocents being lined up for the slaughter and how awful it is.
Yeah,
which is kind of my issue with like Elephant, which I don't think that this is. I am not an Elephant fan. I don't think this is just purely an empty stylistic exercise like that. I do think about that movie. I think there's a lot more, going on here. But that's closer to the angle I'm getting at than the, blood, like exploitative in the blood and guts sense.
Yeah, I just think if it turned away, like if you have a story where the central person is going to be a, serial killer shooter, we're gonna have to watch it. And how are you going to watch it? It's going to if that's the thing you're following, you have to show it, and it's gonna have to be fucking sad.
I think this is actually a weirdly good transition into Tower, because like what it doesn't do, right? Tower does.
Oh, for sure.
Tower doesn't. It actually is very restrained in the violence it shows, right? Like
sure.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get ahead of you.
No, I just want to say I think that's
you're the guest.
I think it's a good time to just kind of maybe pop in with our final thoughts about this, because I do want to use it as a jumping off point into Tower, and make sure that we all have said our final piece here. We do like to declare whether we would unwatch a movie or not. Which I'm not at that point with this, so I assume that neither of you are.
No, not at all.
I think the worst I could say is that this is a very powerful movie that I have very conflicted feelings about, and I actually, I really would recommend it to anyone interested in the, this kind of thing, or in Bogdanovich or Karloff, or so many different ways. Like, this is really powerful movie making that I just, 2 times now by the end have not felt just really worked with what it was trying to do. Maybe just that it's not quite ready to actually grapple with how devastatingly good it is at depicting what's happening. And maybe, but I think also people would argue that that's where the power comes from. And I totally see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a landmark new Hollywood movie. I don't think I would recommend it to people. It's definitely not. It's not a movie that I wouldn't watch again by any stretch of the imagination. It's productively upsetting in a lot of ways, even when it falls short of the mark.
Yes, as much as I want to like immediately be like, Mark found things not to like in Targets. Damn it. But I keep on going back to like the word miraculous, and for like always being the caveat of why I like the various elements of it. So I'm surprised that it is in some ways is as lauded as it has become, because I do think it is like fucking bizarre, like collection of crisscrossing atmospheres and stuff like that. And
again, I think it's only relatively recently that the movie has gotten a second life. Like it is, if not within the last 10 years, then the last like 15, where people have been like, oh, like Bogdanovich's first feature is actually, it's relevant and resonant for all of those reasons, but it's also like people are like, oh, it's actually really good. Like I think for a long time it was sort of sidelined as kind of like a kind of a trial run for what later happened. But I think it's a good movie. It stands on its own.
I've always been a huge Don DeLillo fan. All his like books, and once I watched this, I was like, oh, this is like a Don DeLillo movie. To me, I just really like in all the senses, and in the ways that there are both like there is a very hit you over the head metaphor going on that also somehow blends into the background and lets it, it's amazing. Yeah,
a lot of the Bobby stuff is like the Oswald stuff in Libra, right? I mean, without the like political subtext, but it is sort of like a guy trying to keep his family together and losing his mind, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh my
Yeah,
god,
yeah.
yeah.
And now,
Unwatchables, unreadables.
yeah, for sure. So we fast forward to 2016, and here we have a documentary about the actual event itself by the filmmaker Keith Maitland. And this, like you were saying, Vikram, is you could never, ever accuse this movie of being exploitative or rubbing your face in the ugliness of what's happening. I mean, maybe there's some sort of angle for that, but to me, this is actually a quite beautiful movie and a beautiful tribute that is completely focused on the victims and the people who showed insane courage in how they went out to try and help them that day. And I mean, that's kind of just there's a lot more to say about this movie and what makes it special, but that is the split here that I think makes this such a great pairing with Targets. Also,
I mean, do we spoil it?
Targets.
Target. Are we all on the same page with that? Does anyone have like what came to mind when I watched this was Dear Zachary, which we did on the podcast. And it is like a true crime like documentary, and it was a thing that me and Marc sort of grappled on a little bit, which was the real thing about that movie. I think anybody who watches it has to kind of confront, like, is this doing this for good reasons, even though it's obviously like we're on the right side of, a murder or something, but like, is this manipulative? And this really felt like, if there's any doubt in your mind, like this is like the golden standard, like after I watched it at least, for how you don't mess that sort of thing up and do real justice to everyone involved.
I tend to agree with that. It's funny because I have not seen it since 2016, so almost 10 years. And I did look up contemporary reviews at the time because I was like, I remember reading some stuff that was a little, didn't necessarily accuse it of grotesquerie, but did have some sort of issues with the use of music and the kind of the way that the animation shifts from like black and white to color. I do think there were people who just didn't vibe with the rotoscoping at all. I mean, there are people who kind of just that wasn't their cup of tea, and that's fine. I do think it's a very deliberate and purposeful, like Brechtian device in order to kind of explore, the actual, to kind of immerse you in the events without fully immersing you in the trauma, right? It's doing just enough to kind of keep you involved without putting you literally trying to fully kind of put you in the face of the violence. And I think it does it very effectively. I did sort of pay attention to the music. It is kind of a little on the nose at sometimes, like, and it doesn't bother me that much or at all, but I could definitely see like, okay, that might be a little kind of pushing it a little bit. But otherwise, I largely agree with both of you, especially at the time. I remember watching it and finding it very emotional and being very floored. And at the same time, I watched it this morning and I felt the same way. Like, I think it is it's designed to be very it's to sort of highlight how the banal context in which these sort of unbelievable violent acts occur, right? Which is, it's very much like people going to class and people going on a newspaper route. And it is sort of, it is absolutely underscoring the fact that when these things happen and when they're inflicted upon people who don't see it coming, the context in which it happens is very mundane. And that kind of mundane context inevitably takes on sort of like a tragic presaging quality just by the nature of the event in which it is surrounding, right? So in some sense, you can't avoid that. You can't avoid the kind of like tragedy of like, oh, he's going on a paper route and then this happens, or oh, I was just working at the store and then this happens. Like, it doesn't, in a fictional context, it might seem like you're gilding the lily, but when it comes to history, that's just how the shit happens, right? I mean,
yeah, and it's awful when you get we just all
shot,
pretty much can agree that that's the music that should be playing when a little kid gets shot by a grown man.
And the flip side of that is that you're also seeing some extraordinary, in the moment bravery and tough decisions that is also coming out of these completely mundane situations.
I mean, the whole thing of the lady laying down next to her is like it'll break your heart. Like that's just unbelievable. Next to the pregnant woman, I forgot her name, Cynthia. And her, just that woman Rita, just like running out there just to lie down next to her is like an incredible, like true angelic, selfless behavior that will stay with you. I do think it's funny because I have a friend who grew up in Austin. And ironically, not ironically, but coincidentally, he was also an assistant for Bogdanovich 10 years ago. He worked as his assistant for I believe like a year. But he refused. If you want to get out the topic of Unwatchables, he refuses to watch Tower. Because he's like, I grew up on that campus. I grew up in Austin, and it's too freaky for me to watch that movie.
Sure.
And I'm just like, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the major thing I was like watching and like interrogating sort of throughout the whole thing, kind of through my tears. It's like hard not to be swept
it's
up.
A heavy
it's like
film,
impossible
man.
not to get swept up. Was the animation and the choice of animation, which I think that's probably the brunt of criticism. Probably gets like, now what is it doing with that? Which I wind up going back to the one of the policemen that eventually in the end is one of the ones who apprehends and stops the gunman. They're like asking him like everybody who's on display here is like asked how did it feel, what was it like to be there, which is always the thing that we're asking in these true crime things, which he answers is just like, well, I would have to describe the colors of a rainbow to somebody who can't see color or who can't see, right? Which to me is like why this is such an effective way of doing this, because if you did it just a live action reenactment, we've seen in Targets how that's utilized, and that there's actually nothing to see. We don't see these like colors of the rainbow we've never seen. It's just people doing awful things, and it's mundane and it's tragic and sad. But this like offers the interior. Animation is able to offer an interior experience that like trying to get at that, I think, which is really beautiful. And wonderfully used here in the way that it's seamless with the reenactments and because like most of this only towards the end do we actually start to see and hear the actual voices of the folks who are still alive and were involved. There's actors who are playing them for like a good 50 minutes of the movie before we even see them, and they're usually rotoscoped, right? Which gives like the interviews, the talking heads are rotoscoped, and the reenactments are rotoscoped. So it gives this whole like, it's not like we're cutting from like a real person's like talking head, and then we have to do the jump to being like, now that is a reenactment of her doing that by an actor, right? It's the actor is in both places, which I thought was something I've never seen in another approach to this. It is this mergence of an actual like narrative, like I don't know, biopic or true story movie and a documentary.
Well, yeah, and in case anyone isn't familiar with that term who's listening, I mean, rotoscoping is basically just taking something that's actually filmed in live action and animating like over it.
Yes.
Which is a technique I'm pretty sure like, Disney was using to an extent that to help them animate, all kinds of things without being as overt about it. I think when we talk about this kind of rotoscoping, we're thinking about how Richard Linklater used it in Waking Life and A Scanner Darkly. There's probably a bunch of other examples that aren't coming straight to my mind.
Those are the two. Those are the two big ones.
And it does here what a lot of my favorite documentaries do, which is add this element of abstraction, which instead of distancing us, at least eventually, to me, seems hyper real. And it's a way for you to project the actual people who we do eventually meet onto what we're seeing in a way that you couldn't quite do if you were looking at it completely different live action individual, or if this was a normal dramatization. And like Seth was saying, what it seems to be is that everything that these people are actually saying are being said by their real life interview subjects, but they're being said by their younger actor counterparts, who again are in this rotoscoping. And yeah, eventually when we do start to see the real people, and it kind of starts peeling away those layers and showing you them saying like the same lines in the two different versions of themselves. And it's so effective for me. A lot of, like I said, a lot of my favorite documentaries do that. Like I thought about The Arbor, that
yeah.
I believe that that had actors just mouthing along with the interview subjects who were talking. Right. And I think Wormwood maybe does something, maybe not that exactly, but the way that it has kind of there's these actor counterparts in a way that kind of fuzzes reality. And yeah, and it's so great here. And then of course it just adds this whole, it allows for all these moments of eerie beauty, or really a whole atmosphere of it. Like I'm thinking about when, if there's any main character in this, is it Claire that her name was?
Yes, I think so.
Who is the pregnant woman who is shot, and the movie kind of centers around her, although it's very much about the group of people. And she talks
the
about
center of our empathy. Yeah,
right. She talks about her boyfriend who was killed immediately right next to her, and it kind of does this little flashback of them meeting, and it's like psychedelic with flowers blooming and everything. And I mean, I just think that's so wonderful, and there's something true about it. I don't see how anybody could accuse that of being like a bad way of going about, or a disrespectful way of going about portraying this.
Almost like giving a gift to this this woman, and also a tribute to this man who just like was cut short. It's amazing.
Yeah, no. I think like until I'm gonna just, I think like for the first 45 minutes the movie is fairly impeccable. I think that like the blending of archival footage with the rotoscoping, the fact that it's reenacted but it never tips its hand that way. It doesn't like foreground the reenactments. It feels very present tense, because it is just younger actors, kind of, repeating what has previously been recorded interviews with these people. Some of them have since passed. And it does feel like there's an immediacy to it. And you're 100% right that the distancing effect actually sort of accentuates the reality of it, right? Like you're watching animation, but it never feels like you're watching animation. It feels like you're there, even though it's just giving you just enough of a barrier so that you're aware that there is an artifice. And I think that's like the best use of those kind of techniques, right? It's to kind of like put you in the interiority while also giving you just enough of a gap between what's actually what happened and what, from an audience stand, let me just say that again, the gap between like kind of the audience and the text. And I think that when the real life people come in, it is jarring when it first happens, and it's effectively jarring when Claire, the contemporary Claire, her face pops up, and I think it's really well done when it happens. Like you're like, oh, okay, like this is where it's going to go, and it is kind of like it's not the movie isn't so abstract that it has to teach people how to watch it, but there is a way of like, it is sort of like guiding the viewer to what it is doing as it is going on the whole time. And I think that is incredible. It's incredibly well done in that sense. And I also like how it is real time for most of the film. Like it doesn't belabor everything. It starts when it starts, and it's jarring that it starts the way it does. And it's not until the last 5 to 10 minutes, when it sort of becomes like an aftermath thing, that I have mixed feelings about. But even now watching it, I had mixed feelings when I saw it back in the day, 10 years ago. But when I watched it now, it didn't bother me that much. I was like, okay, all right, this is kind of what it needs to do to pay tribute to the people who kind of gave their time to kind of relive this trauma. But I think from a purely formal standpoint, it's an incredibly effective movie. Like it is absolutely a movie that takes a kind of interesting nonfiction lens to an interesting quasi-experimental lens to what could have been a very traditional kind of dull trad take on this kind of horrific event.
Yeah, and I
Yeah, or
do agree.
even
Like, it does seem to get more conventional as it goes on, especially in the very last, like you said, 10 or 15 minutes, which it's still like it's still very satisfying.
No, of course.
It seems maybe a little bit less of like a cinematic achievement like the rest does once you kind of settle in a little bit more with that. But like you said, that moment when it does, like out of nowhere, all of a sudden we see this girl who, in the present tense is saying, well, I just figured, I guess this is the end. And then boom, to this much older lady
Right.
who has lived a very full life that we find out,
uh-huh.
and maybe it's just because it happens it really is like the midway point of the movie.
I think it is almost exactly the midway point.
Yeah. So I have read some things that suggested like maybe if it would be more powerful if it didn't become such a big part of the movie and it was something that was just a little bit later. But again, the trade-off is like it is still so like emotional and full, and it is hard to quibble with it.
I'm willing to forgive it,
Yeah.
frankly. I I mean, I understand where that's coming from, and I have sort of I can turn my nose up at certain things, but I also think that like a lot of this movie, first of all, it helps that it's 80 minutes long. It is kind of a very succinct look at this thing. It's not there isn't some sort of protracted epilogue. Like it is very much like a movie dedicated to the people who are still alive who survived these things. And I think like any sort of problems I have with the last 10 minutes of this movie, they're still very much like it is a very gracious tribute to the people who like gave their time to remember this kind of like horrible event. And it's like, who am I to whatever? It's fine. Like I find it incredibly sweet that those two cousins like reunited, and I think it's really nice that this woman like adopted this child. Like this stuff is, I'm not made of stone. I think it's totally fine.
Yeah, it's kind of like a trick that it does. I think the first bit is earning its feature length, you know, feature length form rather than being just a tribute and just a look back with these people who were involved in everything that it like could have been like if it was just the ending, right?
Right.
Like for me, the like formal like inventiveness and all the stuff that is really interesting from a cinematic point of view, and like in the as far as like it's in conversation with the documentary conversation and stuff. What it's doing there, it's like really stimulating, and then I think it just gives up that game by the end, and it kind of just gives over to it being just now it shrinks its appeal in a way. It appeals to everyone, but its care, maybe its aim, becomes even more just aimed at giving the voice to these people, giving the mic over, and it being a place where, yeah, even if you could see some of it as being like too wishy-washy or tacky or something, it just like it's no longer playing the game of a movie in that way anymore.
I think the like what I would say is that for a movie that is very matter of fact for most of the runtime, when it becomes overtly sentimental, there is kind of a tonal change that you have to sort of adjust with. Because what I think the movie does really well is that it portrays these sort of selfless, heroic acts from a position of like, well, I just had to do what I needed to do. And it isn't belabored, and there isn't, and just by the nature of history, it's not overly dramatized, right? Because it's just like I sat under the shade and I realized I had to go get her, and I did. And you just had the guy who was deputized who just like felt compelled to just back up these cops. And I mean, the moment that got a lot of play at the time, and I still think is very powerful, is that student who was like, I realized I was a coward that day because I was never going to go out there and help these people. And you have this sort of like, the reason why this stuff hits as well as it does is because there isn't any like juice on it. There isn't any sort of like sprinkling of drama on it. It is very flat. And it does kind of give you the sense of like what real people do to help other people. It is immediate and it is sort of instinctual, and there isn't fanfare around it. Which is why the last 10 minutes, as forgiving as I am, it is in a different tone. And I think that's what people are reacting to. But I also think it's a forgivable shift in tone because you also are moving to the present day. And these are the people who got to live and got to like live their whole lives, and they have their own take on this, and you have to kind of give them the space to voice that.
And I think actually one of the most powerful moments comes during that stretch, and I'll kind of get to it in a roundabout way here, because I think one of the most daring things this movie does is that it never dramatizes Charles Whitman in any way, or never depicts him. I don't think even in like a glimpse.
No, there's no photo of him as a full-grown man. Yeah,
we only even hear his actual name twice in news footage. That it's almost passing, like you could miss it if you weren't looking for it.
Yeah, I was looking out for if the name gets mentioned, and I was like, I really thought for a second they were going to go the whole time without even mentioning the name, and I was like, oh, okay, no, they do at the end, but it's very sparing.
Yeah, and it is, at least it's from, actual news report broadcasts that can't really be avoided.
It's like a photo of him as a child.
Yes.
Like
that's
Time magazine.
That's the only thing we see is the adult Claire holding up this magazine photo of him as a 3-year-old, and her talking about how she is a teacher now and she's raised this clearly like special needs child, and she's just this totally different person. And when they ask her point blank, do you forgive him? And her response to him is she says, how can I not forgive? I've been forgiven so much. And it just took my breath away. Like
I fell through the floor. Yeah, I was gone. Yeah. No. And as hokey and as that might seem, from this like old lady, but you really can hear it here, and you just really have to sit and really let it in here after all that you've seen.
No, it's a very emotional. I mean, there's like at least 4 or 5 moments where I was on the verge of tears the whole time. I mean, like the whole bit that I had forgotten completely was the kid goes to the hospital and the parents just assume the kid is dead the whole for like hours. Like I'd completely forgotten that part of it. Whereas like someone went to the kid's father and was like, your son has been shot. And it's like him and the mother and his sister, and they're like in the hospital, and he's like, oh yeah, they had no idea. They they thought I was dead for like hours while I was like, okay. And there's stuff like that'll just like absolutely break your heart. And the whole, I mean, it's funny how certain attitudes are portrayed in the movie. I think it's I think it's really interesting that, well, first of all, let me return to that. I do think that one of the best moments is the cop saying he genuinely regrets not going up to the tower immediately. It's I coulda, shoulda at the very end, and he's like, but I didn't, and that's just how it goes. And I do think there's a thread of regret that courses through the movie in ways that I think are really interesting. But I also think that there are it's very honest about political attitudes in the film that I find that aren't belabored, but I think are genuinely very honest, where you had that same cop saying like, oh, when I heard shots, I just assumed it was Black Panthers up there, and it was like revolution. And I was like, wow, all right, okay. And I was like, okay. And then you had the other guy, I believe the guy who saved Claire, who's still alive, was like, there's some people who think we should take that Jefferson Davis statue down, but like it gave me shade that day. And I was like, wow, we're very honest that this is still Texas. Like, it is very much still Texans.
That was a pretty funny line.
Oh, it's a great
Yeah.
line. And then you also
Yeah.
have like the feminist who is still alive, who very much said she was a coward, and she goes like, "Oh, there's a lot of testosterone that day. People just came out with guns and they're just like shooting back at this tower." And I was like, "Yep, all right." I did find it really interesting, or kind of mildly amusing, that when the flag is waved at the end, it did not stop shots even immediately. Like it took a while for the shots being fired to stop, even though the flag is waved. I was like, no, these people are not gonna stop shooting it at the tower. I think it's very honest about that kind of stuff, without sort of putting any sort of editorial comment on it.
Yeah, I could have done it without maybe that like montage at the end showing the ensuing
that's the
tragedies
weakest
from
part.
the future.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
it also is just
know,
not needed.
We all know, kind of thing.
Yeah, just while we're nitpicking, but it's just nitpicking. Because
well,
honestly,
I mean, in the way that like I think they dodged other things like so miraculously, like in the way that like they can guys, they gotta stop using that word, but here it is. But it just kept on, like the tragedy is touched on always. It's never shied away from here. But what you walk away with, it does seem like what they emphasize is like the like uplifting aspects, like to use that word, but I don't walk away from it feeling like this was an inspirational true story or something. Like it feels like the heaviness is there, which again is just such a balancing act that they pulled off here, even letting the end be almost exclusively sort of that sort of like hugging at the end and just bringing out like what was good and what was good in the end and who I forgive and all this stuff. It is interesting how it doesn't belabor, and that could be like a sticky place where it like maybe sure rubs your nose in it. In like the fact that like, oh, this tragedy happened to this father and this mother, and like it's just more like they know that we feel that. They don't have to convince us that we feel that, and equally like they don't have to convince us to we connect the dots here that this is Columbine number 0.
I think the Cronkite stuff actually works really well at the end. I think like that whole Cronkite address where he talks about society and all that. I think that stuff is really powerful, and I do think that the movie should get a lot of credit for capturing how fucking weird it is at the time. Like it is just like we're so inured to it now, and I mean, I've become way more sensitive to gun violence on screen in the last 10 years. Like I in a way that it never used to affect me, but just being in the world, like I have become way more sensitive to that kind of stuff. But I think the movie does a really good job sort of capturing how incredibly jarring and almost surreal it is when it was happening in the moment, just because of how unprepared people were for such sort of like random acts of violence. That
they talk about how they don't talk about it.
They don't. Yeah,
like,
I mean,
they went back to school the next day almost.
And I can confirm that I think a lot of people who grew up in Austin, who are still around from that time, they very much have that attitude. That is very much like, this is something that we don't want to revisit. We don't want to.
They said they don't have a monument there. They don't have a plaque
which
there.
is
it's insane.
It's interesting. The one thing that popped to mind is that I there's that bit in Slacker. I don't know if you guys have you seen Slacker?
Awesome.
Yeah. Where I mean, I think that movie is perfect, basically. But the sour, and it's not like a sour part, sourness on the part of Linkletter. I think it's very honest. But a moment that is really kind of gross in that movie is when the anarchist is like looking at the tower and is going like, he's very rueful that he missed the shooting, and he's very like, that was such a glorious moment in history where he was finally like shooting back at society, and it's this like really kind of nasty, disgusting moment in that movie where you have this guy who's just like this old anarchist who's like really regrets not being present for this act of violence. And I think it's very honest to a certain kind of like old crank of that time, especially with, who's living in that area.
Out of touch.
Yeah. But it is just like, it is like every time I rewatch that movie, I'm like, oh man, it is like, especially having seen Tower and you see all this stuff, you just like, that moment just sticks out. You're like, oh my God, what a disgusting thing to say.
Well, it's almost like Linklater helped get revenge on that guy by using the rotoscoping as that inspired
oh, absolutely.
how this movie was done.
Yeah.
And it's very much, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Maitland believes this, but I definitely think it is absolutely like a nod to Linklater being like the Austin boy and using this technique. Like I absolutely think it is some kind of nod to him to use this kind of formal style.
And, I do think this rallies for the very last shot, which kind of uses movie magic to put these, this version of the couple, right before the shooting happened, when they were still together, she was still pregnant, and they put them right in the present courtyard of the University of Texas, walking happily by. I mean, what a perfectly lovely ending to also bring that whole, conceit back in a meaningful way. And what another gift, for these people.
What you can't achieve in life, you can achieve in film.
Beautiful. So yeah, I think unless anyone had anything more they wanted to add, honestly, it took me maybe 4 minutes to start being in tears during this movie, and it kind of didn't let up till the end. So it was kind of, I don't know if I could have done this podcast right after finishing it, but
my partner came up after, like, right at the end, and I was just like in tears, and I was just like, why do you do this podcast again?
No, it's a heavy movie. I might need another 9 years before I can watch it again.
And Keith Maitland, he's made one movie since then in 2021, which I have not seen, but sounds really interesting. Dear Mr. Brody.
Dear Mr. Brody. I have not seen it either. He's done a couple. I think he did a thing for Vice, and he did like a PBS episode. I think he's a behind the scenes doc guy. I would like to see him do more stuff. I would also like to see Dear Mr. Brody. I missed it at the time. But he's an interesting guy. I mean, he definitely has a good head on his shoulders, I would say.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation, Vikram. It was really great having you on. Thank you for your time. Is there anything that you want to, draw people's attention to or plug or anything?
No, I mean, I'm God help us all. I'm still on Twitter. And you can find me.
We're going down with that ship.
I mean, apparently, I should have a website. I'm just being lazy without putting one together. But I am Faux Beat Poet, FAUXBEATPOET, still on Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle, and I post a lot of my work there. I regularly write for The Nation. I'm been doing work for Mubi. I recently reported on the Alamo strikes in New York that recently concluded. I spent about 2 months talking to those guys and writing about how the strikes were going on and why they were striking and all of that. So go check out that piece at Mubi Notebook. You can find my work there. You can also just Google me. You'll find plenty of new stuff there. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I really have been a longtime fan of your writing, and it was great to have you here today. And thank you so much for taking this lovely stroll through history with us.
Oh, I appreciate that. I hope I was articulate. I worry that I could get a little twisted up with words sometimes.
Oh, but no way.
Oh no, you did.
Tony just replaces it all with auto tune.
Yeah, exactly. You can just auto tune anytime I'm stumbling over myself. It'll sound all right.
Add a beat.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.